All right, we're back at the Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Gloria Purvis, who is a Catholic commentator. She is the executive producer of the Gloria Purvis podcast. She is a lover of Jesus, and we're very happy to have her on. So thank you, Gloria, for joining us.
Oh, Stephen, it's my pleasure. Glad to speak with you.
And I want to mention to everyone, we first spoke back in 2020. We did a print interview. Well, we spoke over the phone, but then we
Yeah.
printed an interview in America Magazine covering a lot of ground. We talked about politics, we talked about race, we talked about spirituality. And as I was saying before, a lot of the things you said just it stayed with me over these years, and I wanted to continue the conversation. So this is why we're here. So yeah, I think we should pick up where we left off. I mean, you had mentioned, and we talked a good amount about spiritual warfare, how it impacts the political discourse, how it, gives rise to racial prejudice in the country. And you had mentioned that you were drawn to Carmelite spirituality. But I think I want to kind of go back to the beginning of your, how you found faith. And I think, did you mention, had you converted to Catholicism as a child?
Yeah. When I was 12, I had a mystical experience during adoration. Even though my parents weren't Catholic, they had sent all of us, my siblings, to Catholic school from first to 12th grade. And we were at adoration with the principal of the school, who was also my religious education teacher, because we'd been misbehaving during lunch. And for her to cope with it, you know, poor Sister Carmelita, may her soul rest in peace. For her to cope with it, she made us go to adoration because even though we apologized, we cleaned up, she just was like, oh, no, no. So she went to adoration. We went with her, and she was over there trying to work it out with Jesus. I mean, I guess that was just, she was just having her moment. And while she was over there working it out with Jesus, I was sitting there quiet like the rest of my classmates because we didn't want to get in any additional trouble. And during that time of silence, I was consumed by a fire. There's no other way to describe it. My body was completely on fire and it was burning, but it was not painful. It's a sensation I still remember these so many decades later. It's hard to put into words, but it was a fire that consumed me. And in that, being consumed in the flames, I had an immediate knowledge that what was there in the monstrance was real, was alive. It just, that also is very hard to describe. It was just a knowing, I guess, an immediate knowing. And that from that point forward, I knew I was supposed to become a Catholic. So I went home to my parents. I was 12 years old, and I said, I think I'm supposed to become a Catholic. And thanks be to God, they didn't complain or they weren't obstacles. They were like, "Oh, you are? Okay, then you're gonna be a Catholic." They're like, "You're gonna go to mass every Sunday, every holy day of obligation. You're gonna pray the rosary. You're not gonna eat meat on Fridays, all the things that they knew about Catholicism. At the time, it's so interesting. I uh, think about how God has done certain things in my life. One of my mother's best friends, who was also my godmother, even before I was a Catholic, she was a cradle Catholic from Louisiana. I mean, you can't get more Catholic than
Yeah.
that. And so it was through that closeness, I think, that there was no worry about what Catholicism would be. Also, my dad had cousins who were Catholic, even though they didn't live the southern part of South Carolina. They lived in the Piedmont region of South Carolina. So it wasn't like I saw them often. So it wasn't like this fearfulness about what Catholicism is, right? Which you often can find in the Bible Belt. So they didn't have that fear. And they also knew what church I was going to go to because there was a Black Catholic church. They were friends with the priest, Father Figaro, who was a Holy Ghost father. Um, yeah, so I think for them, knowing I had a Black Catholic community to go to really mattered. I think if there wasn't one, they probably would have been like, we're not letting you go to church with these racist white people. I mean,
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
just, as a child, no way. No way. Now, they might not have said it like that to me, but they, as adults, understanding the reality of living in Charleston, South Carolina, would have recognized that there would be no safety for me to go to a white Catholic church. There would be no community for me. And that's just the reality. And I know maybe to some of your listeners, they're like, how can that be? Look, it's still like that in the United States. Okay. Let me just wake y'all up to that. There's still racism in the United States, and the doors of the church are not a shield against that sin. And any parent wants to make sure their child is safe wherever they go. And my parents, as people, Black people who also had parents who've grown up in the United States, grown up in the South. So, I mean, I think, my parents were just realistic. I think, and so I think it was quite, I think they were comforted that there would be a community that I could go to and that they knew a lot of the adults in that community already. So it wasn't like they were turning us over to Black people who were also strangers.
Hmm.
They knew everybody anyway. So it was a blessing being able to go into that Black Catholic church, to be taken care of and to have community. And it's interesting. I think about it. I literally was dropped off by myself to
Hmm.
mass as a child. And now that I think about it, it's just, I don't know if I would have done that, if it were my child. But I also understand at that time in America's history, the experience of the Black community and where people lived by, because they didn't have a lot of choices, built this sort of closeness anyway, um, which I'm, there aren't as many Black Catholic parishes today. I'll just say like
Yeah,
that.
that is true.
So yeah, so that's why yeah, it would be a different thing if it were my child and I had to drop her off at a parish. I probably wouldn't do that because there wouldn't be that community for her.
Hmm.
So yeah.
But I mean, what's surprising to me is that your parents kind of trusted you, trusted your own spiritual journey, letting you go in your own direction. And I think it's a testament, I guess, to their trust in the spirit. The spirit was guiding you, but also their respect for your freedom, that like, you have your own relationship with God, and that they didn't, not only did they not get in the way, but that they actually supported you and wanted you to really go all the way in this direction, right?
They really did. And I mean, being a Catholic impacted a lot of things in the house. So my mother didn't cook twice on Fridays, so nobody ate meat on Fridays. I
Wow.
mean, it was
Mm,
just so yeah, no, it was a real change. As non-Catholics, they didn't go to church if Christmas didn't fall on Sunday. They didn't go to, there was no Christmas service in the middle of the week. Well, for Catholics, we do. So that was a different experience for them as well. And as I got older, I went to midnight mass and things like that. And the interesting thing about it too is my sister's converted. So
mm,
at some point before we all left, the house for college, my parents and my grandmother, my paternal grandmother who lived with us they were the only non-Catholics in the house.
mm.
So I remember during Lent, my mother would go to each of us, what did you give up? What did you give up? What did you give
Wow.
up? Right. So, and we always give us some kind of food or something like that. So she would always prepare something with all of our dietary restrictions in mind, and everybody ate, whatever that was.
Yeah.
And I remember my parents waiting up on, Christmas Eve for us to come back from midnight mass before we could open all the gifts. Just so many things. I also remember when we bought another house, my parents, God bless them, were all ready, that day for us to move in, and we're like, we're not sleeping there. They were like, what are you talking about? We are not sleeping in this house until it's blessed by a priest.
Wow.
And so they were
Huh.
like, are y'all serious? And we're like, yeah. So they called up Father Figaro and he came over. And I think about that now. My sisters and I were walking closely behind Father Figaro. And of course, behind us were our parents and my grandmother, because they were like, okay, I guess that's what Catholics do. Y'all follow the priest around the house, as he blesses the house. And of course, we said some of the prayers with him that as we were supposed to. So yeah, now that I think about it, it did bring a lot of change in the household. And also my Baptist grandmother being the one to encourage me to pray the rosary
Mm,
as a new convert. She was the one that showed me some Catholic devotions that she knew just from knowing other Catholics. She's the reason I make the sign of the cross every time I pass a Catholic church because she's like, that's what you're supposed to do. Now, at the time, I just followed what she said, but then I had come to realize it's because Christ is there in
mm,
the tabernacle. Um, so I'm really grateful for how my family really embraced uh, my practice of the faith and encouraged me. I mean, they did stuff like when the Pope came to Columbia, South Carolina, we packed up in the car and went to see him. When Mother Teresa, no, John Paul II is what I'm talking about.
yeah,
And when Mother Teresa came to Charleston, we went to see him because my grandmother went to my father and was like, hey, your kids are Catholic. These people are important to them. We got to go. We got to go see them. Um, and so, yeah, I'm very appreciative of that. And I'm also appreciative of the sacrifice because you have to understand, my mother was very active in her Methodist community. And one by one, our little pew, if it was a special way that they had the seating. It was like you were enclosed in a special box. It's
mm,
just an interesting way of how the church was built. So one by one, her box got smaller and smaller till finally it was just her in
wow.
the box. And, no bitterness, no embarrassment, no, oh my gosh, I look foolish in front of the community. I mean, my mom played the organ for the church. She was the accountant for the church. She helped prepare the children to say their Easter speeches. I mean, she was really a bedrock for that community and for her own children to one by one leave for the Catholic Church. And people say, hey, where's Gloria? My mother's like, she's Catholic. She's not coming back here. You know, Never bitter about it. Never, never. Just, God has been generous with me that way and to give me the kind of parents that I had and for them to um, not be concerned about their reputation in their faith community
Mm,
with their children leaving and becoming Catholic. It was never a thing. I just
mm.
blessed for that, I think.
Yeah, but again, it's a sign that their priority was their children's relationship with God and not what it looked like or not their agenda. Um, but I mean, I'm wondering, given like their openness to Catholicism, like, did you find that your experiences with Protestantism or your interaction with Protestants has played a role in your own spiritual path?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you have to remember it's through Methodism that I came to know God, right? My whole faith, because my mother was a Methodist. So that's the church that I attended. Those were the beliefs that I espoused. Now, granted, I was a child, so I didn't know deeply what Methodists believe. I knew Jesus Christ was real. I knew God was real. I knew the Bible was real. I knew how to pray. I understood, I mean, not deeply, but that about the resurrection. And also my grandmother being a Baptist, with their beliefs and, her big thing that you got to be dunked in the water to be baptized,
Yeah.
just a lot of things. But there was always a strong belief that God was real, just always. And I think growing up in a family that was multi-denominational, I never had a battle, with people who didn't believe exactly as me. Like if you didn't believe in the Eucharist and your church didn't have sacraments, like we do in the Catholic Church, it didn't bother me, and they didn't bother me either. So they never had anything negative to say about the Catholic Church or the Pope or the Blessed Mother. I mean, we were praying the Rosary. Right? And a lot of people would say, oh, you guys worship Mary. My parents were never like that. My Baptist grandmother was never like that. And again, she was the reason I continued to pray the rosary because she encouraged it. She put a rosary in her room, right around her four-post bed, say, I want right next to her Bible. She says, I
Mhm.
want you to know it's okay for you to pray this. In fact, you're Catholic. That's what you're supposed to be doing. So yeah, and I remember at her funeral, we prayed a rosary in her Baptist church.
Wow.
All my friends who were Catholic that were there, we got together and we prayed the rosary for the repose of my grandmother's soul. Um, yeah, no, God has been very good uh, to them. I will say to my mother, to my father, and to my grandmother at the time of their deaths. I really believe because of their yes and support of my conversion to Catholicism. But yeah, no, I've never had a problem. I understood that people could love each other from different faith backgrounds. So I never had a contentious, view of other religions. I still don't.
Yeah. Wow. And then, so no, I do want to go back to that early experience you had in adoration of, like, as you described, being on fire. And it kind of, it makes sense now, having heard about, your experience with Carmelite spirituality, because it is like when you hear Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, like you hear that kind of internal spiritual fire that consumed them. So I'm wondering at what point like you started to become drawn to these Carmelite saints and to enter into that kind of spirituality.
It's more like they found me, honestly. I knew
Hmm.
nothing about Carmel, never heard of a Carmelite. Uh, didn't understand anything about Carmelites, Dominicans, Franciscans, none of that, coming up uh, as a Catholic in the South. However, when I was in high school, for Spanish class, a Spanish teacher, Sister Amelia, wanted me to enter a Spanish competition. And she wanted me, I had to pick somebody, and she had a list of people. And for some reason, I was like, okay, I'll pick her. Well, it was Teresa of Avila.
Hmm.
In retrospect, I realize now that was the beginning of something with the Carmelites. I still, even though I was supposed to be her for this Spanish competition, had no idea who she was, still had no idea about Carmelites. And then for some reason, the competition, it was a statewide competition, if I'm not mistaken, was canceled. So I never had the opportunity to go and do my soliloquy in Spanish of some words from Saint Teresa of Avila. I don't even remember what it was I was saying
Hmm.
that were words of hers. But many years later, in looking in the rearview mirror, I started to see the um, the hints that the Carmelite saints were trying to get my attention. Like I didn't know who Saint
Yeah.
Teresa of Lisieux
Hmm.
was. I never heard of something called the Little Flower. None of that. But then I met all these other people like, oh my gosh, a little flower. And I was like, who is that? You know? But I will tell you the actual encounter that made me go look at Carmel. So I had been feeling, and I was an adult at this time. I was married, newly married, relatively. And I had a dream
Hmm.
that I was walking to my house, except I was all brown as I was walking. And I realized I was supposed to, it's interesting how dreams work, but I realized I was supposed to be a part of a community.
Hmm.
And when I woke up and had been thinking about it, I was like, well, I guess I need to go look into religious communities. And at this point, I'd heard about Dominicans and I'd heard about Franciscans. And I was like, am I supposed to be a Franciscan? They wear brown. I don't know. I don't know. So I started to meet people who were Dominicans, actual like priests, and met Franciscan priests. Just in the course of life. That's interesting how God arranges things. But I wasn't sure. I was like, I don't feel any attraction to any of the stuff that anything about them or the communities. So I was praying about it and I asked a friend of mine, Donna, who is she had consecrated herself as a victim soul for Christ. Now she's someone that just because of her medical condition, suffers intensely. And she has a specialized medical condition where she actually does feel like she's on fire all the
Wow.
time.
Wow.
And it's a rare condition, and usually people have it in just small spots on their body. Hers is body wide. And she also has a condition where if you hug her too hard, you could break her bones. So Donna has an intense prayer life. And she was actually became a secular Franciscan in her early teens. She'd asked her parents, and then she had gone to Georgetown, I want to say, and then just had one day she says she was leaning back and heard a crack, and the bone in her body had broken. That was the beginning of the discovery of this
Oh, wow.
special condition that she has, and then pain. And medicine and trying to deal with it. So she lives in a special care facility. So I remember talking with her and I said, Donna, I think God wants me to join a community. I just don't know which one. Dominicans, Franciscans, I don't know. And she said, okay, okay, okay. She says, you know what? There's a Marian feast coming up, and I'm going to pray that God give you a gift on that day so you'll know which way he wants you to go. So I went to mass that day of the feast, didn't have any interior lights that made me say, okay, Dominicans, Franciscans. And so I was like, okay, maybe I'm not supposed to be in a religious community. And I just set it to the side. And I was like, okay, there's no confirmation here. So I'm not supposed to be in any community. And then out of the blue, after dinner that evening, a priest friend of ours called up and he says, hey, I'm in the area. I just finished up spiritual direction. Can I come by the house? And I was like, yeah, we love you. Come on. And so I remember looking out the window, and he's a Franciscan priest, about 6'5", maybe 300 pounds, big dude, long beard. So he's noticeable when you see him. And I
Sure.
saw him walking up to the house, open the door, and I was like, Father, and I was giving him a hug. And he was just very serious. He says, Gloria, I was in prayer this morning, and it became very clear to me that God wanted me to give this gift to you. And he said, then this is my favorite icon, and I'm giving it to you. Well, it was Our Lady of Mount Carmel.
Wow.
And
Okay.
the voice of my friend Donna saying, I'm going to pray to God give you a gift so you'll know which way to go. I'm never thinking an actual gift in the
Yeah.
physical.
Yeah.
I'm thinking a gift of some discernment that I would know. So I was speechless. And Father came in and we sat on the sofa and I was just looking at the icon. And then I remembered having a conversation with a longtime friend of mine who I didn't even know she had been a professed Carmelite for like 20 years. And she had told me before this that she had been asking Padre Pio, because he had appeared to her in a dream.
Yeah. I believe that.
And Padre Pio looked at her and said, Ah, you're a Carmelite. And she just looked back at him. He says, I'm going to get you more brown ones like you.
Hmm.
And I remember her telling me that we were laughing about it, and that came immediately right back to me, that conversation. I said, and he was a Franciscan of the same community of Padre Pio.
Ah, wow. Okay.
So, all these connections, it was like hitting me in it was just surreal, I guess, because I had just assumed it'd be something, again, very spiritual gift, which in a way it was, but it was also made very physical. So I still have that icon of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, because he gave it to me and it was his special favorite icon. And that's so Franciscan as well, to just give away a possession like that was beloved to him. So that made me say, okay, I have to find the nearest Carmelite community. And that's how I became a professed Carmelite, just from
Yeah.
realizing that's where God is sending me.
It's interesting how the Carmelites will like often give you a literal gift. Like, I mean, you hear the stories of Saint Therese giving people roses as a
Oh,
sign.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? Thank you for reminding me of that. So before I had entered Carmel, so I don't want to freak people out. Let me
Yeah.
just say this. In Carmelites, we also understand that things that happen can be deceptions from the enemy. So we
Sure.
pay no attention to these kinds of things that we experience
Mm,
because
interesting.
you have to discern it as from God. So anyway, before I was in Carmel, I remember waking up one night and our room was just, the smell of roses was so powerful
Wow.
that it woke me up and I was just sitting there in the scent of roses and I was waking up my husband like, "Do you smell this? Do you smell this?" He was like, "No, that's for you." And this, he just went back to sleep. He said, "No, that's just for you," and just went back to sleep. And when I talked with him about it the next day, he says it's either the Blessed Mother or Saint Therese. And I'm like, who was that again? And he's like, oh, yeah, the little flower. She gives roses. Because I had been praying about something. I don't remember what it was. But the deep, I mean, strong, I mean, it was so strong it woke me up. So again, that was another, and looking in the rearview mirror, another Carmelite, reaching out to sort of tap me on the shoulder to try to get my attention. And also, when I started reading St. Teresa of Avila, mind you, I was not professed. I walked into our bedroom in our house and I saw a habited nun looking out the window, like looking outside my house toward the cars we had outside. And I looked at, I immediately knew what she was looking at, and then she was gone. And in that moment, I had recognized that things of the world can be an unhealthy attachment. And my desire for complete freedom from these attachments to things of the world was just swept me up in a second. And in that moment, I had all the courage and detachment to just give it all away. And then that was immediately
Wow.
gone. But
Okay.
here's the thing, it was immediately gone. It was
Hmm.
like I had it in that moment, and it was like she was telling me all these things are of no account. Do not let these attachments trap you.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain. She said nothing to me. She did not look at me, but
Yeah.
she was looking out the window at the cars we had outside. And I just immediately knew what she was trying to tell me. And I don't remember what she looked like, but I knew she was a religious sister. That's all I know. And I also feel in retrospect, now understanding more about Carmelite spirituality, that was maybe I'll find out who she was later in life, maybe not even on this side, but it was a peek into Carmelite spirituality. And it gave me for a just a brief second that feeling of freedom
Yeah.
and how liberating it was and how I don't even know how to say it. I mean, you were so free of it that you could just give yourself completely to God without concern for losing anything. And I desired that greatly. And then that that encounter was gone. And then now, on the other side of it, I recognize, yes, God could give you that grace in an instant, but I also recognize through prayer and growing in relationship with God, that kind of freedom can come, but you have to also choose it. It
Yes.
also has to be an act of the
Hmm.
will,
Yeah.
right? And so that takes time and that takes humility, frankly, recognizing you're not there, right? And how much you need God. Um, and as you examine yourself and your attachments, uh, yeah, you see your brokenness too.
Yeah. Because I mean, what I'm hearing is that these mystical encounters, like there's nothing magical about it. Like it doesn't take the place of your free will and your reason. You
Absolutely.
still have to engage it. Um, yeah, but no, I mean, I also want to highlight what you said about how it wasn't so much you found the Carmelites, they found you, like they pursued this relationship. And I mean, that's me as well. Because like I remember since I was a little kid, my grandmother had this profound devotion to Saint Therese.
Oh,
That was always in the foreground. But then when I was studying Spanish in college, we had to read, in a literature class, we had to read the poems of John and Teresa,
uh-huh.
which, got sparked my curiosity. And then eventually started reading more. I visited the shrines and yeah, I mean, they've played a huge role in my life, but it was their initiative, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
They're,
yeah.
they're, they're like that.
Yeah, and it's the other thing that happened to me before I joined Carmel is I had come across this Saint Teresa's story of her life.
Hmm.
Okay. And that for lack of a better way of saying it, that fried my wig. I remember coming to the section where she talks about her experience of hell.
Mm.
And I was like running around my room like, what? How?
Yeah.
If this religious sister living in a convent that way back then got a place in hell. Oh Lord, I know mine is there right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, what chance do I have? It was just really, I was like, what? But I also, in reading her, recognized, well, yeah, that's the case. Hell is preparing and so is heaven. You choose. You choose.
Yeah. Yeah.
You choose. Um, And that also had been something, just sh reading her again without the outside of the benefit of being in a Carmelite community. Um, I didn't get her yet all the way, but I got enough of her that I would think deeply about the things that she had encountered and what she was saying. Um, and so that is interesting how that also carried me before I had that experience with Our Lady of Carmel's icon. And then, even still, that's the funny part. I had never considered Carmel because I did not understand that the Carmelites, anything about them, that they even really existed outside of what I was reading in this book. It's just strange how I just couldn't put that together. But I guess it was not, it was supposed to be for me later, I guess.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I want to kind of like shift gears, but I guess for me in my own spiritual journey, like I see how much culture is kind of like a vessel for the spirit to kind of draw me in and like
Yeah.
draw me into God's will. And this is why I wanted to ask you about something. I mean, this didn't come up in our interview, but it was in an interview you did for Church Life. I'm going to read the quote because it really captivated me. So you said, I remember Pope Paul VI saying something along the lines of Black people, bring your gift of blackness to the church. If only all the people would see it as a gift. If people could only see this as a gift instead of something that we need to Christianize, by Christianize, I mean Europeanize. And then
Yes.
also, I mean, Sister Thea, a servant of God, Sister Thea Bowman, who, in front of the conference of bishops, had them all repeat the line, Black is beautiful.
Yeah.
This is, it's been on my mind for a while because, like, a lot of the content that we put out in Cracks in Postmodernity places a strong emphasis on culture, especially, like, just considering the fact that in the United States, like there's always this pressure to assimilate, to kind of lose your cultural roots, whether that's, I mean, Black American, whether it is European, whether it's Asian, Latin American.
All of
There's,
that.
there's this sense, there's a positive sense of like, okay, we're a melting pot, we all come together. But my fear is if we lose our roots, if we lose whatever traditions we grow up with, we don't really have a foundation culturally, but also spiritually, we kind of lose the foundation.
Yes.
And one of the things that I see, like when we talk about race, whether it's inside the church or in general, there can be this tendency to reduce it to like a mere political identity. And
Correct.
obviously, I mean, the politics matter, of course, but
Yeah.
I get concerned that we lose sight of the fact that blackness is not just a political category, it's not just a skin color. In the US, it's a cultural patrimony. Like there's a legacy that's very rich, that
Yes.
is spiritually rich as well as artistically, culturally. Um,
Yes.
and I think that's the genius of what Paul VI was saying, but also Sister Thea Bowman understood that like it's not just that we have to treat Black people like equals, it's that there's a gift that
Right.
the culture, the tradition has to offer, where
Right.
it's been working for years. And I'll just add lastly, like my own spiritual journey, I do attribute very much to, I mean, I have to say in particular music made by African American artists because like I don't know, my father raised me with Motown, my mother was into R&B, and like my family was not particularly religious when I
Hmm.
was younger. But I always had this kind of spiritual curiosity, this hunger. And it was when I was listening to these artists whose musical styles were very much shaped by the spirituals of slave
Yes.
times.
Yes.
You hear this longing for freedom, for salvation, that even the secular, like the R&B music, even in hip hop, like you hear the roots in gospel, you hear
Yeah.
that spiritual longing. And that kind of gave me an outlet to like to start to articulate that I'm looking for something more. These singers are hinting at the fact that there's something greater. And I don't know what it is, but
Hmm.
it gave me hope to keep searching. And this is why I say, like, it's not just a matter of politics. Like, God is working within the culture, within the
Uh,
history, you know.
100%. It's interesting. When you look at poetry by Black artists, paintings, writings, um, music, the blues, jazz, loss and hopefulness are tied up into all these things, as well as suffering. And unfortunately, within our church, people will infantilize Black cultural styles that could be present in liturgy. So, like, um, making fun of gospel, you're too emotional and all this stuff, and not cerebral as if we're somehow dumb. And I remember this beloved priest friend of mine, Father Ray East, who's a phenomenal singer, just such a love of Jesus, and you feel it when you go to mass and the way he celebrates. And one of the things that he was saying in a homily, he was like, "But we have to remember King David danced." You
Yeah,
know, King
that is true.
David was emotional and jubilant, you know. And it was just such a, yeah, that's right. And remembering that what we have is who we are. And God wants that, right? He wants us to give ourselves to Him, all our gifts and talents, not just the monetary, as some people have you think. And I always found it peculiar that people could get so excited at sports and football games, and that was totally okay. But to be excited to be in the house of the Lord, to actually be able to receive Him, and that jubilation that we might express
Yeah.
somehow was misplaced when it was within Catholic liturgy, just didn't make a lot of
Yeah.
sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I have two thoughts. I mean, first of all, to a certain extent, I relate, like having, the Italian side of my family who, I mean, maybe not always in the liturgy, but like with the saint feasts, like that sense of celebration is crucial. And I
Yeah,
think, I mean, this is where I get a little controversial, but like I have to say in the US, because I mean, it was the Irish Catholics who kind of founded everything and like built
yeah,
everything up. There's a certain cultural sensibility, there's a certain temperament that the Irish have, which is much more, I don't know. I mean, much more intense, much more I don't know what the word is, but it's not as vivacious. I think there's something about, I don't know, like you even see this in Latin America. Like there's just a different cultural sensibility. And and I respect the Irish and their spirituality, but it's a problem when we impose this like, but this is what reverence looks like, and
right.
everything else. So again, the same thing with like these wild Our Lady of Mount Carmel feasts that the Italians have
Right,
in
right.
Jersey or in the Bronx. Like it's not necessarily irreverent. Like sure, it could become, but
Uh,
this is the importance of enculturation, though. Like we have to look at how can the spirit use the traditions of each respective culture.
right.
And no, I mean to your point though about gospel music and the liturgy, like I am a fan of Latin Mass and
It's beautiful.
Gregorian, yeah, I mean Gregorian
Me
chant if
too.
done well is beautiful.
Hmm.
But when like oftentimes I'll go in Harlem to the parish of St. Charles Borromeo, which is a Black American community. They do use gospel music at the Mass. I have a similar experience, a similar encounter with God there. And this is what I think a lot of people miss. Um, sure, the tone of gospel music is different from um, Gregorian chant. But what they have in common is that they're rooted in an actual, like the tradition is rooted in an experience of being in
Yeah,
relationship with God, which is different
yeah.
from like, I have to say I struggle with contemporary praise and worship music and like kind of poppy music because it's
Yeah.
not really rooted in a tradition in the same way. Like it's kind of a new innovation that
Hmm.
I don't know, like there's something very traditional about gospel music, a
Oh
different
yeah.
kind of tradition from the Gregorian
Yeah.
chant, but it is a real tradition that's where God has proven himself to be active. So that's why like I have a very deep spiritual experience there. Also
Yeah.
at Mass, when I go to the Italian saint feast, like
Yeah.
there's so that's why when you're categorically like, oh, but it's not reverent in that way, therefore it's bad. It's like, well, no, what does the word tradition mean? It means it's rooted in, like an experience where God has proven himself active. That's what a
Well,
tradition is.
yeah, well, think about it. I mean, think about in this country how, unfortunately, the sin of anti-Black racism has tended to uh, look at things in Black culture and pathologize it in some way.
Hmm.
And yet at the same time, it's so peculiar. Also embracing th some things of Black culture, like jazz music. I actually met somebody that like didn't even understand that Black people had anything to do with jazz music, and I'm like, what kind of jazz are you listening to? You don't know this, right? So it's interesting to also see some of the things that have been born of the Black experience become co-opted and emptied. Like our part in it is erased for some people. And I was like, that's so strange. Like
Mm.
even just a study of history or even a study of the jazz greats, how could you miss that or of the blues or any of these things? But there's a segment of America that is taught that way, that there's nothing good that has come from our community. And of the things that they know of us, it's criminal, it's dangerous, it's sinful, it's not reverent, all of those things. And it is to be they is to for them to be real Christians, they have to be emptied of that. And I remember a particular experience with a young white male who was with another girlfriend of mine. They were both teaching catechism for RCIA. No, not RCIA, CCD for the teenagers that were coming
Yeah.
into confirmation. And he was saying to her that, we got to get these kids good Christian names so that they can get into heaven. And she's like, what are you talking about? And he was basically like, we have to Europeanize these kids' names for confirmation, and we have to have them pick a good saint name as well. And just his attitude that because these names, which he thought were too ethnically black or whatever, would be a barrier for them to attain heaven was wild, was crazy. And this was not, I mean, we're talking in the 2000s. So this is not like a million years ago.
Yeah.
And I was saying to myself, and he was a cradle Catholic. And it's just that how could someone in the modern age with access to information and growing up in the church
Yeah.
have this attitude and additionally have no pang of conscience to share this to with Black people, to say this like, hey, your names are a problem, and so we got to get you good Christian names. Well, let's just say she let him understand his error, which I think was very uncomfortable for him, because he was supposed to be the one informing everybody else, right?
Yeah. Then, but that's the other thing that's like concerning to me is that a lot of people don't know that Black Catholics in the US have, a long history. I mean, Father Cyprian Davis's book is obviously like the main place
Yeah,
to start for that. But no,
yeah,
like when I tell people like, oh, I went to St. Charles Borromeo, like it's a predominantly Black American parish. Of course, there are people from Africa, from the Caribbean there too,
sure.
but they're like, oh,
Hmm.
I didn't know that there were African American Catholics. It's like, well,
Wow,
part of
wow.
that's part of that's because I mean the church's lack of effort to really take care of and like foster the growth of predominantly Black parishes. But again, like when we look at the people who are being considered for canonization now, it's like it shows you like they're not only do you exist, but like the contributions to the American church are huge.
Yes. Well, so, and the question is, even no reading Father Cyprian Davis's book, even seeing how difficult it has been to try to get an African American even recognized in the U.S. church, how long it's taken to even get their causes going and getting things going to Rome. What duty do the bishops have? Do they not recognize they have a duty uh, to Black people, not just the Black Catholics, but Black people in general, because their predecessors actively decided to ignore the Black community.
Yeah.
So, what is and and even looking at the diocese in the South, you know, what is your outreach to the African American community? What does your Office of Black Catholics look like? How are you funding things? Where are where are your parishes?
Yeah.
Where are the parishes or areas that you open for mission, right?
Hmm.
I won't say which diocese, but I had occasion to come across some information of a diocese, and I saw that the ethnic community, if you will, was predominantly African American in this particular diocese. And like the African American population was three times the size of the Hispanic population.
No.
And yet, the outreach to the Black community was embarrassingly low. Like there was one county that was over 65% African American. The only Catholic presence there was a mission, and they had mass Saturday evening, 6 p.m. in Spanish in a predominantly African American county. Well, what does that say
No.
of who the church is
Yeah.
interested in? How could you be in a county that is over 65% Black and you don't even, and you call yourself having a mission there, and the only language you're offering for maybe 2% of the county was Hispanic, was Spanish? What does that say to the Black people there? It says you don't want them. It
Yeah.
says you don't
Yeah.
want them. And how can that be in the year of our Lord 2025 that we still have Catholic dioceses operating like that?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it shows you the problem is a lot deeper. They have resources for the communities they want. Let's just put it like that. They have resources for the communities they want, and they don't resource adequately the communities that they don't want. No other way to put it.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, it goes back to, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of this comes down to a lack of faith because, like, if you see the spirit is active in certain communities, then that's your criterion for deciding, like, how are you going to allocate funds. It's not, again, these superficial things like, well, who do I want? Who do I think is, no, it's like, if God is active there, let's go. Like, if there, and especially if you have a small community that may be struggling to get by, like, okay, then you invest the resources. And that's, I mean, I think the most concrete example of this is where you have predominantly Black parishes that are struggling financially and you don't prioritize putting in the funds to keep them open. Because I mean, I've seen
Right.
one of the dioceses I've been in, and it's like, well, that should be a priority for you. Investing in it, trying to make it grow, especially if it is in a predominantly Black neighborhood.
Yeah.
But again, as a matter of mission, like if you lead by faith, then you would have seen that, you know.
And the thing is, to me, a lot of African Americans already in the United States are Christian, believe in God, believe in
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. They just don't know yet about our sacramental theology. So it's not like you even have, it's not like you have to overcome anything, like to make them
Mhm.
believe that God is real, or to believe that Jesus Christ is real, or to believe in the saving graces available from God, right? And yet, and yet, there's the attitude that it would be impossible to, go and try to invite and try to share the faith with the mind to being open to people coming into the church. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to be sad, when they have to face God and answer for that. I think a lot of people are going to be sad.
Yeah, I mean, but the other thing I'm going to add to this though is that like I've seen, especially like teaching in predominantly Black neighborhoods, like I see how much the force of secularization is even encroaching upon Black communities that typically have been very much full of faith, that have a strong history of church involvement. Like I
Sure.
see a lot of kids coming from Black families who are unchurched, who are losing, not just who aren't going to church, but like lose sight of these greater spiritual values, as well
Right.
as a sense of they're being part of a great legacy of, Black American culture, of their roots, of their history, like this
Yep.
atomized, like very individual mentality. And I see the difference between like a lot of the students who did go to church, who were very much close to their elders, their grandparents, who told them the stories, who imparted
Yeah.
a sense of the greatness of the history, of the culture, the traditions. And you see like there's this vivacity to kids who have that the spiritual and the cultural rootedness, the historical rootedness, and that's why I think again, like for all ethnic groups, for all communities, but especially for Black American communities, like the church needs to prioritize that sense of mission because you see how not only do people lose their spiritual values, like it's a social detriment. Like if people are living
Yeah,
as like atomized,
right.
individuals, like it's not good for the society. Like there isn't a motivation to live, to contribute to the common good.
Right. Well, that
That's
there
why
is
it's
even a
important.
common good, right? That
Yeah,
there is even something that we share together and that we can flourish as humans
yes,
together in the name of, in the cause of justice, right? It's not just a I'm gonna get mine, the heck with the rest of y'all type
yes,
attitude, which
exactly.
is dangerous. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And but again, like considering the history and the reality of racism, like this is why I do think like Catholic dioceses need to pay close attention to how building up Black parishes, like that itself is a way to combat um, uh, not just the moral dangers of racism, but also like the material, the economic impact,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Well, and then also our seminaries then have to start making an effort to train men to go into these communities. I mean, I see a lot of effort, not that there's anything wrong with that, of trying to send these white dudes over to Mexico to learn Spanish. And I'm
Yeah,
like, but you can't send them across the tracks to the Black community that already speak English.
right there. Yeah.
Where are you trying to help them to understand there's a community also already right here that has been largely ignored that, can you go in that community? Can you serve them? And our seminaries, I think, have a responsibility to form men no matter what their background, to be able to minister in African American communities. Um, because you can't just send some, could you imagine? And I'm going to say this because a lot of people already know this guy. Could you imagine if they sent a Father James Altman to a black church? He'd run everybody out of there with his foolishness. I saw a homily he did on lynching, and it was so ignorant and so racist and so hateful. I thought they need to come in there and bless that church after what he said during the homily. No, hardly any mention of Christ, right? But all about this attitude that black people should be thankful that white people freed them and died for them and
Wait, what
lynching.
is the logic behind that? I don't.
It was just straight up racism coming from the pulpit. I mean, there's no other. I mean, I watched this and I was like, Lord have mercy on his soul. How did he get so twisted? How did he get to be so? I mean, it was just white supremacy on display. And what also was so sad is all the people in the pews listening to him. He's creating scandal. And I looked at also some well-known Catholic evangelists that were boosting him. Now they've separated themselves because they felt he went too far with the way he was speaking about the Holy Father, thanks be to God. But the racism was not at all odious to them. They had no problem with the things that he was saying. They were completely historically inaccurate misrepresentations. It was sick. It was sick. And I thought, yeah, you can't send somebody like that. Actually, he shouldn't be in a priesthood, in my opinion, based on the kinds of things that he was saying, because it shows bad human formation. And it also makes me wonder what kind of formation process did he go through in the seminary? Because to me, when you release a person like that onto the people of God, you do quite a bit of harm. And that's probably why he's not allowed to say public masses, doesn't have a parish now, and is going through some things right now with his bishop. But we need people who can go into these communities and actually love them. Be what Pope Francis said, smell like your sheep, really accompany them, not in a way of sort of this paternalistic attitude, but one of true fraternity,
Yeah.
true, you know, engagement in that community. They see themselves as also a part of that community. So yeah, I mean, we have a lot of work to do. I mean, in that regard, right? At the time of Daniel Rudd, who was the founder of the National Black Catholic Congress, where the church failed, he and a lot of lay people were reaching out to Black people and saying, hey, give the Catholic Church a chance. Her doctrines are beautiful. So it's a sad thing that it had to be just lay people and with the help of Venerable Augustus Tolton
Yeah.
to try to
Yeah.
do the outreach and evangelization in the Black community. So, yeah, we still have a lot to do.
Yeah, no, needless to say. But yeah, okay, so just to wrap things up, since we've been talking about culture, I do want to
Yeah.
ask you, I mean, I don't know, like what are what's some of your favorite music, poetry, whatever. What kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
culture speaks to you?
Oh, my gosh. So I was just listening to Mahalia Jackson,
Yeah. Yeah.
listening to some like old gospel by Mahalia Jackson, and oh my goodness. Ooh. It just takes you. Also, the Amazing Grace album by Aretha Franklin,
Yeah.
where she has
Mhm.
James Cleveland on there with her. Just, ooh, such a spiritual experience of you could just meditate listening to that and thinking about it. Just incredible.
I love
So
the
those just,
movie.
huh?
I love the movie, which I mean ultimately
Yes.
goes with that scene.
I think people should. So I encountered the album, of course, Amazing Grace, before I saw the movie. And I saw the movie when I was on a plane heading to Louisiana for a women's conference where I was going to speak. And I was crying, bawling
Yeah.
my eyes out on the plane. I was trying to keep it together in the beginning. And this black woman sitting next to me just touched me. She said, go on, sister, just let it out. Because she could see what I was looking at on the screen. And
Yeah,
so
I
that's what I was like,
understand.
okay. It just, because it was such an experience, when the choirs
Yeah.
marching and singing. I mean, that experience is so like, it's so familiar to me as a Methodist and as a Catholic,
Yeah.
having gone to Black Catholic churches, the choir processing in and singing a gospel song and the whole congregation just right there with them. It was just such a specific thing in the community that all of this coming together, this whole body praise, if you
But
will.
see, that's what I was saying though about tradition. Like this isn't like this is a very rich tradition that like I don't know. It
Yeah.
annoys me when people are like, oh, but that's contemporary. Like, no, it's not.
Right,
Very
right.
old.
I mean, so I was trying to think of other art. Right now, I've been just reading some Du Bois. I
Hmm.
had been also reading James Cone, who's not Catholic,
Yeah. Yeah.
but touching into the Black experience being like the cross is
Hmm.
actually a lynching tree
Yeah.
and pointing to there's something to learn from Black people, the Black experience that points you to God,
Yeah.
which, as I understand it, is not necessarily present in a lot of theological study.
Yeah.
It's studied as if there's nothing that Black people can bring to an understanding of God or that so these things, as of late, I had been reading along with some C.S. Lewis, who's not Catholic. I know you said, what are some, Black things that I've been reading, Black authors,
I
but
mean,
Black art, but
anything that
yeah, but
inspires you.
definitely
Cool.
Cone, Du Bois. I always go back to Father Cyprian Davis's book
Mhm.
just to read through sometimes, just to recall. And also, I've been reading David Walker's Appeal again, which I
Mhm.
think every listener, if you don't know who David Walker is, if you don't know about David Walker's Appeal, please go read it. It is powerful, powerful, powerful. And that's also a part of the Black liberation experience in this country from its earliest parts, the appeal to white Christians of their own faith, to
Mhm.
hold back up to them and appeal to them. Your faith says that, but our experience of you who claim to believe is so contrary. You even see Black people during the revolution saying, pointing out the hypocrisy of wanting to be away from the British crown and the oppressiveness of the British crown, and yet their own oppressiveness to Black people. And why should the freedom you want is the freedom we want? So
Mhm.
it's just amazing. All of these, if you look at Black liberation writings over time, oh, powerful.
Since you bring that up, have you read much of Marcus Garvey, who
You
considered
know,
himself a Catholic?
yeah, no, I've not read much, but I remember in college we'd watch documentaries about him and discuss him in our Africana classes, and his movement basically to get away from, we needed to be gone off by ourselves and be away from America, be away from white people for our own betterment, right? And improvement. So yeah, I'm familiar with Garvey. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, obviously the separatist thing is concerning,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
no, I mean, I think there's something to his Catholicism, which I mean wasn't perhaps completely orthodox, but there were certain
Right.
intuitions about, I mean, everything I was saying about like the richness of the cultures of the African diaspora, but also like he was very clear on like he would always say that like he would want black Jesus and Mary statues
Yeah.
and paintings because he was saying, okay, if God becomes incarnate and he enters into our experience, our culture, including black experience. So
Of
there's, I don't know,
course.
there's a certain like incarnational, particularly Catholic sensibility he had, even though yes, I mean he went in the separate.
Yeah, some other things. You're right. Well,
Yeah.
that's his point of saying that, though. I will tell you, Stephen, the most hate I get online is when I share depictions of Jesus and Mary
Seen
that are
that.
black. I mean, I have people say you're a liar, and I was like, but well, then you honestly understand Jesus didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes, and neither did Mary, right? You understand they're not European, is what I'd say to these people. And yeah, but he definitely wasn't black. And I was like, and yet that's the only depiction of Christ that you have a problem with. Why aren't you screaming about all these other white depictions of
Yeah.
Christ? And they don't really have an answer for that, right? Because that's not what's offensive.
But that's with the incarnation. Like this is why as Catholics, like we have art that reflects our respective cultures. Like
Yeah.
Italians have, you know, the very swarthy Southern Mediterranean. You have
Yes.
Chinese Jews because it
Yes.
goes into our particular culture. Like this isn't sh breaking news, you know, and yet people react in silly ways.
Even though it's not breaking news, Stephen, you'd be surprised how many young Catholics take issue with that. I'm talking about young white Catholics because
Yeah, I've
have
seen.
been in quite a few online Facebook groups, people that say they're devout, but then have this extremely negative reaction to the expression of Blackness in Catholicism. And it always comes out, I thought we were one, but their definition of one excludes my presence, my being, anything that reflects me back to them. So it's just a sad state that we're in right now, I think.
It's the
But
reactionary thing because like I see these young people on the internet who like okay they see the excesses of certain progressive iterations of racial justice which the intention is true but maybe they go in a certain direction that's
it's not,
concerning but like
yes,
then you just react and say well I'm completely against anti-racism because that's communist and that's it's like okay I mean if you really engage your sense of reason, like you would understand that just purely reacting to certain excesses is not an actual response, but it's also that it's contrary to the church's social teachings, the certain church's moral teachings. Like, this is why I feel bad about people who live their faith purely on the internet. Like, not to say
yeah,
that there isn't ridiculous stuff in person, but like
right.
the internet makes it an echo chamber where like you're not there's very little space for you to be challenged. But okay, but what is actually rational? Like what is you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
too
No,
much of the
I hear you.
reactionary stuff.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And it's unfortunate that even within the internet, we also have clergy that um, play into that kind of stuff. It's just it's a sad thing, but it is what we're dealing with right now. And I keep thinking of John Paul II saying the new evangelization is we have to go wherever people are. So, we do have to also get on the internet because it is a
Yeah.
means of connecting to people. But boy, so many lies are already out there. Sometimes it can be exhausting and it's also can be a very poisonous environment where people feel free to say things to you online that they would not dare say in person,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of that
Yeah,
too.
I mean, it's a real space of like it changes the nature of spiritual warfare because it's not
Uh-huh,
face to
uh-huh,
face, because it's not that incarnational, it's not disposed to
uh-huh.
that incarnational experience. So I think we have to be on our guard. Um, but anyway, just so let's close.
Yeah.
Tell us something tell us something that's been giving you hope, that's been giving you like encouraging your faith, your spirit in these days. Let's end on a positive
S-
note.
So this is something I think, if you pray the Liturgy of the Hours, right?
Mhm.
I've come to understand how the liturgy keeps reminding us, the Liturgy of the Hours keeps reminding us of God's promises to us.
Mhm.
And to pray them day after day connects you, I think, more closely to God, so that even in the tough times, you're rooted in something beautiful and true that I think strengthens. And I also think about, so it's the Liturgy of the Hours, and I also have been thinking a lot, especially with the reversals in this country regarding race. I also have been thinking about my ancestors and the kind of fortitude that they had to be able to persevere where there was no protection for them, and how they never lost hope in God, and how just as having studied a lot of things, remembering how the enslaved were like, they may have our body, but they don't have our minds. They can say all these things to us, but they can't control what's in here. And what was in there was an encounter with the beauty of who they really are and the truth of what God says. And even though the enslavers may, through violence and all these other things, have their exterior bodies behave a certain way at a certain time, they had this interior freedom that could not be touched.
Mhm.
And that is something that also I find extremely hopeful. And it's something that all of us are capable of, right? Nobody can control the interior. They can make you do things perhaps on the exterior, but they cannot touch the interior, which is often where we will encounter God. So that to me gives a lot of hope.
Yeah, so let's pray that we can maintain that freedom. And I think like we should be paying attention to the ways that we can allow the spirit to maintain that freedom. Because
Amen.
like you said, it's a collaboration between our free will and the initiative of God.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. And let me add
So
this one little piece
yes,
of
yes, go
wisdom.
ahead.
For those who are concerned, oh, I can't pray the liturgy as this, and any other, a very old Carmelite priest who's already gone on to God, may his soul rest in peace, said, the most important time in a Carmelite's life is that silent prayer.
Mhm.
So we do a minimum of 30 minutes a day minimum
Mhm.
of silent prayer. And that silence, that waiting for God, he said, is the most important. So even if you can't do, give God that silence. Maybe it's not 30 minutes, maybe it's just 2 minutes, but give it to him. Give him that silence where he can come and you can commune with him. Do that.
Yeah.
So I hope that's
I
helpful.
mean, much more can be said in the silence than all the talking we do on the internet and
Amen.
yeah.
Amen.
So Gloria, anything you want to plug to our listeners? Anything you want them places you want them to follow you or
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
anything?
Maybe they could follow me on, I'll send you, because I don't know all the addresses, but I'm on Facebook, I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Threads. I still have an account on X, formerly known as Twitter. Um, I haven't been as active on that lately, and I'm also on Instagram. So I will send you all my social media handles, so people can follow and interact. And I'd love to engage with people. What is on their minds? What kinds of things are they leaning on in the faith, or how's the faith leading them? So I love to interact with people in that way as well. And how are we expressing our faith in the current environment that we're living in the United States, the things that all of us are experiencing? How does the faith inform how you critique, analyze, or wake up to what's going on? So yeah.
Gloria, thank you again for coming on, for continuing the conversation we started a long time ago.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much.